So reintroducing Ed Harkness, presenting to the Heller Lake Community Club on March 3, 2022. Thank you very much, Ed.
My pleasure. Is it all me now?
Yep.
Okay, all right. Thank you. Thank you all for attending tonight. I'm going to kind of pick and choose a few poems from all of my books, my three full-length collections. And I'm going to start with a poem from 6. I'm going to start with a poem called Putting Things By, and it's from this book here. My first book is called Saying the Necessary. Let's see it there. When this poem is set in Montana, where I lived for several years back in the, my gosh, back in the early 1970s, 50 years ago. Seems incredible. In fact, I was at a graduate student at the University of Montana, and that's where I met my wife in Missoula, Linda. And we used to take these long, loopy drives around the Montana countryside outside of Missoula. And so this is a poem that grew out of one of those drives, and it's called Putting Things By. I only know it was Montana nightfall, out a long highway, one of the canyon roads that goes and goes. We stopped the car, hiked an overgrown pasture reclaimed by bitterbrush and sage, and entered the listing hulk of a barn. What year would that have been? Pigeons fluttered high in the arched rafters. We held tight. Our flashlight caught the spray of hay dust. The last blue of day shone through broken shakes. Smell of old saddles, bridles, smell of old cow shit in empty stalls. On a shelf, thick with the grime of years, we found a Hills Brothers coffee tin, a red one. Picture of a guy in a turban. On the side, copyright 1932. Inside, something hard, tarry, sweet. I warmed it on the stove, scraped the black gunk off the top to reveal the secret of eternity. Honey, dark as molasses, 40 years old and fine. We ate it on cornbread. I stirred it in my coffee. I still believe someone left it there for us to find. A farm woman, long dead. A life of putting things by. Cherries, pears, in blue jars. A woman who cared for bees. We put things by to last against decay. The barn, the tin, they rise above a wild field of irises. You'll forgive me for saying this. Time is honey. Now we glide together across the Swan Mountains over moonlit snow. Yeah, I'll never forget those lovely, lovely drives we would take around Western Montana. I'm going to read one more poem from this book, and it's actually the title poem, Saying the Necessary. That's the name of the book of this particular poem, and it grows out of an article I happened on in the newspaper about a man who became lost in the mountains. I can't remember now if this occurred in Montana or Colorado, but in any event, in my poem called Saying the Necessary, I change some details, so it's not factually true, but here we go with saying the necessary. I read of a Montana man whose pickup stalled in the mountains. Cross-country skiers found him next spring, their skis rasping on the top of his cab, just showing through the snow. His engine dead, no map, he'd apparently decided to wait for help. His diary calmly records his life of being lost. He describes the passing days, how he rationed his crackers, an almond joy, built a few small fires at night, ate his emergency candles, ice from a pond, a pine's green lace of moss. He hoarded every spark from his battery. There's evidence he wandered up a nearby ridge. He might have noticed a marmot, gold and relaxed on a rock, or spotted mountain goats wedged high in gray basalt. From a pinnacle of broken, lichen-colored scree, he watched the world bend away blue, rivered with trees. He might have heard the whine of a plane in the next valley, looking. Then the cold came. Frostbite settled the matter of hiking out. He wrote detailed accounts of the weather, noting the clear, icy air, little flares of stars drawing no one's attention. Not so frigid this evening. A later entry read, ribbed cirrus clouds moving in. Then brief goodbyes to his wife and daughter. My lilac, my rose. When the blizzard buried him, he wrote by his interior lights, and when the battery failed, he scratched in the dark a strange calligraphy, covering the same pages, the words telegraphic, saying only the necessary as he starved. In the end, his script grew hallucinatory. Toy train, oatmeal, farmhouse lights just ahead. Illegible finally, like lines on a heart monitor. Several pages he tore out and ate. He must have known even words wouldn't save him. Still, he wrote. He watched the windshield go white like a screen, his hands on the wheel, no feeling. He listened to his heart repeat its constant SOS, not loudly now, but steadily, a stutterer who's come to love the sound of his one syllable, at peace with his inability to get anything across. He must have pictured himself wading through drifts, traversing the heartbreaking distance between voice and any ear, searching for tracks, a connector road that leads down to everyday life. By glow of moonlight filtered through snow-jammed windows, his last act was to place his book opened to a page marked Day 1 on the passenger seat beside him. Okay. Hi, Deb. I'm going to read a few poems now from second book. It's called Beautiful Passing Lives. And it starts with another poem about snow called Out of the Blue. Now and then it happens, often in March, the sun a dazzle in the bare aspens. Blown from clouds hidden behind Bethel Ridge, snow will fall out of the blue like sparks, a swarm of glitter, floating first as feathers, then cool specks on your cheek, like tears from far away. One moment, you're listing all your failings. The next, you're standing with your lover on a gravel bar, showered in a confetti of light. This poem goes out to the suffering people in that terrible war, the terrible war that's going on right now. Ukraine. I actually wrote this poem right around the time of the beginning of the first Iraq war. And I think the theme here will become clear as you listen to the poem. It's called The Day the War Began. I split a few pine rounds, stacked them between a pair of small, just yellowing aspens. Chickadees chattered in a bare elderberry limb. For an hour, the tang of cut pine lingered in the evening air. I changed the well pump filter. In the failing light, I followed elk tracks, a bull, cow, and calf, down the needle-strewn trail to the river, their prints deep in the mud along the shore. As they browsed noiselessly in a stand of cottonwoods, they entered the current. I was aware of nothing but the wild smell of roses, the river inhaling so faintly, I could hear my heart whisper over and over, not again, not again, not again. It's the day the war began. Well, here's one of those poems whose subject is some might consider a little inappropriate for poetry, but you know, my view is that there's nothing that's inappropriate. Nothing's inappropriate for poetry. So this poem is called Jock Itch. And it's set, we were traveling through Italy. It was actually my first trip to Europe. And this is some years ago now. And I came down with this terrible burning in my private area. So here's Jock Hitch. This is the life. La Spezia, July, a cooker. Even in my tan shorts and sweat-stained Italia t-shirt, I can almost breathe. Distant mountains waver in a haze. What looks like snow, I learn, are bands of marble. Same cream-colored stone laborers hauled to Rome in great slabs. Sculptors touched and studied and said, yes. Or in the case of a massive flawed block, said, no good. See those unsightly veins? Michelangelo bought it for a song and gave us David, naked lad with a sling who takes on a brute 5 times his size. I stand outside the door of a small pharmacia, rehearsing what I will say to the wisp of a woman behind the counter. I know 3 Italian words, or did know a minute ago. I'll wait for the shop is empty, march in, and this is the tricky part, point to my crotch. Did David ever deal with this problem? Maybe I could draw a sketch in the back of a receipt and a small arrow to the area in question. I could say crema, crema, and hope there's such a word in Italian. She looks to be a grandmother. She's seen it all, including the brute Mussolini, that ranting cyclops. Probably she speaks English. Maybe my 3 Italian words will sing forth in an aria of fluency. Per favore, grazie. She'll know what I need. She'll know I'm American, essentially dumb, passing through her town in some discomfort. Nothing existential, just a rawness down below where life half starts, the place everyone kids about, the place photographed by millions in the academia where David stands revealed, coolly sizing up the giant before him. While the world's travelers and their teenagers try not to gaze too intently at the beautiful flawed marble pouch and stem between his legs. I'll go in, and the kind woman will know immediately what I need to stop the burning in my groin. I'll buy a small tube of salve and will catch the train to Vernazza, its pastel hillside houses sunning themselves above the Mediterranean. I will be filled with wonder by a patio garden outside our small camera, as though I've never seen lemons or tomatoes or blossoms on the tips of long green zucchini squash. My love and I will sit on a pier with a bottle of local white and soak our feet in the sea. We'll sing the duet from Puccini's little-known work on top of Old Smoky, and I'll feel fine, especially down below where it counts. Okay. Now, here's my most recent book. It's called Saying That it's called The Law of the Unforeseen. And I want to point out that the gorgeous cover is a painting by my mother, Doris Harkness, who's in the audience, the virtual audience. Yeah, that's one of her Sumier paintings that I discovered before this book was published, and I was looking for a cover idea. And I went over to Mom's house and asked her if she had any paintings lying around, and this is what I discovered. So that's the cover, painted by Doris Harkness. And the back of the book is nice as well. That's another painting by Mom. Okay. Hey, Randy. I wonder if you could do me a favor. Can you hear me, Randy? Randy, can you turn off your mic? Can you mute your microphone?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So I'm now going to read a few poems from this book, The Law of the Unforeseen, and I'm going to start with one called Great Apes at the Zoo. And if you haven't been to Woodland Park Zoo lately, you should really get there and go visit the apes and see the baby apes that are running around and jumping and cavorting. It's really incredibly wonderful, charming. There's also something kind of sad, about seeing creatures caged. So this poem is called Great Apes at the Zoo. It's from this book. Behind the glass barrier and the laughter of children and parents, the mother sits, eating something the keepers have given her. She holds a rind, avocado or papaya, as if it were a small ceramic bowl, lifting morsels of whatever it is to her mouth. She delicately licks her slender fingers. Squatting in straw, she seems Buddha calm, unaware of the gawking world, unaware too, apparently, of her tussling boys, one no bigger than the toddler beside me, his nose to the glass, squealing in recognition, as if he too would like to wrestle and box. The straw flies, dust rises in misty puffs. The little ape slaps his older brother, does a backflip, bumps his head on a log, runs to Mama and crawls on her back to catch his breath. Mama doesn't budge. She drops the rind and surveys her world, a leafless climbing tree that the keepers have installed, a webbing of rope, an artificial stream, and across it, the dark pocket of a concrete cave. Her eyes are bland, resigned, like the eyes of any prisoner or refugee. Kids and their parents have strolled away. The older brother shits in the straw, then knuckle walks to the stream where he cups his hand to drink. The mother gazes off as if at some other life. She reaches back and lifts her little fellow over her head, rolls sideways onto the straw, and grooms him till he falls asleep. By the way, I wanted to mention that I'm going to read a few more poems from this book and then 2 or 3 new poems. And after that, I would love to entertain any questions. So we'll have a Q&A after the reading. I don't, you could probably tell that my poems are written in open form, or free verse, organic form. I don't often write in strict, strict form, received forms like, villanelles or sonnets. Occasionally I do. Here's one example. Here's a sonnet called Coffee. You remember what a sonnet is? Sonnet is Italian for little song. There are various formats for sonnets, Shakespearean sonnet and Italian sonnet. They all vary a little bit in how they're structured, but the baseline is that sonnets are 14 lines long and they have a particular rhyme pattern. I believe mine's a Shakespearean sonnet, but that's not terribly important to know. But the poem is called Coffee, and here it is. We hike with bugs to a nearby creek, there to smell and drink the light. Pass the time we have left together, one last hill to climb that will show us where we've been. We speak, or rather joke, about who'll go first. Is the soul a cloud? Or what about that morning a brown bear caught us in the act? You're the more aware, the one who sees the rapids ahead, the goal not to get there, but to go there. Love, you are always better at fending off the pressures of regret, disillusionment. You see pleasure in morning rain. How could I go on? How do I or you stand alone in willow shade, a place where we kissed, no longer face to face? I'm going to read a couple of poems about my father, Harry Harkness, who was president of the club for, I think it was two terms back when I was in high school, back in the 1960s, way back. Seems like hundreds of years ago. And this first one about Harry, my dad, is called Tying a Tie. I must be 12 or so. We face the bathroom mirror, me in starched white shirt, trying not to squirm, faint frown on my face. He in sleeveless tee, his chest hair abundant, still dark, the last dots of shaving soap on his chin. He calls the knot a Windsor, holds my hands, holding the long end on the left, short end on the right, flipping long over short, looped around, poked up and over the top, tucked in, pulled down, the triangle tightened with thumb and forefinger. All simple, deft, impossible to replicate. He's not a sad man yet. I'm in training for the world, for being a man like him. Sad only when I study him in the mirror, girding for another day at the appliance store, his hands on the shoulders of his smaller self, prepping me first so I can see how it's done, how to tie the tie in a way that allows me to breathe, to not fear the squeeze of being choked. I will, just as he has, come to live with it. And so I have, now that he's gone, come to live with it. To tie my own tie, to accept the discomfort just as he did, whose reasons for sorrow were many. To love again the appliance salesman who turns me to face him as he adjusts the knot at my throat. And we have Randy. Randy,
Yeah.
your mic,
Yeah.
your mic is creating a huge amount of noise. I was just wondering if you can mute it.
Sure.
Please do.
Yeah.
Okay. Your mic is still on, Randy. There, I think it's off now. This poem is called Potatoes. Another poem about my father. He came to me on one of those mild late winter days, my gloved hands gripped on a hoe handle handed down from someone. Aunt Philomena, it might have been, or Ted Strickler, both gardeners, both gone. Sweating, I'd flung my jacket on a limb of the plum tree, went on breaking clods with the nicked hoe blade till I was stopped by the odor of cinnamon and pine. I backed into the rosemary bush, releasing its tang, releasing too my father. He appeared as he had in his last year, cheeks papery, ashen, eyes dull, thin scruff of beard no longer white but yellow. He told me he was okay, said I needn't worry or feel sorry. And just as when he lived, having lost by then his sense of taste and smell, he laughed, went on and on about how much he loved my potato wedges, salted, roasted with rosemary, daubed lavishly, as always, despite my frown, with mayonnaise. I wrote this poem and I finished and I realized I made this kind of cool rhyme at the end where I rhymed the word always with mayonnaise. Kind of proud of that little accidental rhyme. Okay, now I'm going to set the books aside and read a couple of new pieces. And the first one is also about my father, and this will, for those of you who are familiar with the club, you know full well that just right down the block is the Granite Curling Club. And there was a period of time, again, I think it was during my high school years, junior high maybe, where Dad took up curling. So he would go up to the Granite Curling Club sometimes after dinner and engage in a match with another curling team. Now and then I would go up there with him. I'm not sure I quite ever got how curling works, but Dad enjoyed it. This is called At the Curling Rink. I can no longer feel my feet. Even at 13 in my thin-soled sneakers, the world wore an ominous grin. Here, in this weird bowling alley, was a case in point. My father, still in his polished work shoes, necktie tucked into his shirt, the flaps of his orange fur-lined hat pulled down, crouches over the granite stone. His gloved hand grips the handle, one knee on the ice, his head bowed as if lost in a prayer of contrition. He glances up left and right at his teammates, ready with their brooms. They nod. He pushes himself forward, the stone moving with him just below his chin. He releases the stone as if ejecting in slow motion some heavy part of himself. "Sweep," calls the captain to the sweepers. They scoot sideways with the creaking slide of the stone, smacking the ice like a demented cleanup crew. At the time, I could not fathom why my father and the men, who rarely talked, were utterly absorbed in a sport in which almost nothing happens. Still, it was hypnotic. I knew my role then in life would be to take note, to observe. I'd need to come up with a plan to appear normal, to go on living in this icy theater of the absurd. In the glare of the rinked neon, my toes frozen, while heavy round stones float dreamlike toward the colored rings of the target. Shuffleboard was thrilling by comparison. I still see the smoke of my father's breath clouded above him. Still hear the slap, slap of the brooms on the ice, the captain shouting, "Sweep," or "Halt," followed by the loud clack of colliding stones. Once, under summer stars, walking back to the car, his gloved hand in my gloved hand, I asked, "Who won?" "They did," he said. "Has our team ever won?" He smiled, looked at me, and said nothing. Then, "Let's just the two of us go grab a burger and a shake." We have in the backyard, we have a prune tree, and this poem is triggered by this tree. So the poem is called Italian Prune, and well, I'm just going to dive into it. Italian Prune. Wounded, scarred, the tree's been dying for years. Sap has oozed into glass nodes the color of whiskey. Limbs lichen-sleeved, tufts robins yank at nesting time. Each March, buds unfold into ovate leaves. Last year's prune harvest was sparse. Less than a dozen hard green nubs swelled into dusky purple eggs. Squirrels made off with them in a single morning. I've thought to cut it down. I'm not sure why I haven't done so. That's me all over, sure and unsure, depending on the month. My ladder stands near as tall as the tree. Uncertain how to grow, despite its age, its arthritic trunk is the size of my calf. 10 minutes, my limb saw would bring it down. I'd do it now if it weren't for the spiked white blossoms that will appear overnight come mid-April. More startling than spring snow, their fragrance almost too faint to detect an imagined tang like honey-sweetened lemonade in a glass across the room. I can't count the times I've stood here, saw in gloved hand, ready to do the deed, then walked back to the tool shed, hung the saw on its nail, and called it a day. This day, November's bitter chill has settled in. Most leaves have dropped, strewn like potato skins. I might have retraced my steps to the shed, but for a patch of afternoon sunlight in an upper branch, catching a spider hard at it, knotting one strand of its net to the next with its 8 knitting needles. Unspooled from the spider's brown spinneret, the strands gleam, prismatic, iridescent, as if the tiny pouch contained a star. I might have cut this tree 5 years ago, or last fall, or now in the failing light. That would mean the end of sweetness. There'd be no prunes to savor, if saved from squirrels. Instead of the tree, or the orb spider's electric wire that draws my jaded eye, I suppose I'd be gazing absently at power lines, crows on their way to roost, or drooped on a pole in my neighbor's yard, the limp cloth of an American flag. If not for the fruit, then for the silver thread the spider pulls from itself, for spiked blossoms sure to come, for what vanishes, what remains, for a tree that perseveres in ill health, for those I forgive, for those who forgive me, for the irreplaceable world entire, the saw will stay on its nail. I'm going to end with a poem that goes out to my son, Devin, and his wife, Lindsay, and their boy, Cosmo. Cosmo Mackenzie Harkness was born a couple of years ago. He's a little over 2 now. And this poem is called Holding the New Baby, I Feel the Featherweight of My Death. He has arrived earlier than expected, light as a small bag of apples in my lap. Now and then he rouses to blink the black opals of his eyes, still mostly sightless after all that time in the dark. I'm his father's father, and, well, what the hell? I'm on a short leash, wondering if my departure will likewise be earlier than expected, which is, I suppose, always the case. The future announces itself as a quiet, insistent tap at the door. The new being in the crook of my arm yawns. Now his lips part in a reflexive dream smile. I take to mean he means he finds the condition of being alive curious, wryly amusing, as if to say, so where am I exactly? On this bright November morning, a day I've already subtracted from the dwindling total. His eyelids flutter, thinner than the skin of a hatchling robin. Now I'm reminded babies must eat. His mother whisks him out of my arms, off to a rocker in a dark corner, where, After a few urgent squalls, he is quiet, the sucking audible even from across the room. I'm empty-handed once more, happy in a way I've never been. I plan to attend his 3rd birthday, already scripting after the other kids have left with their frosting smeared chins, the conversation we might have. The one where I tell him I held him when he was 1 day old. His eyes were exquisite blueberries, different from the gray-green they are now. He'll only be mildly impressed, more interested instead in tearing off the paper from one last gift. A box with a silver latch and key. He's wide-eyed to lift the wooden lid, to get a glimpse of things to come. I'm more intrigued in learning how to tie together strings of time, quilting swatches of months and years, stitching my life to his as if I had such power, the slightest ability to forestall for even an instant that insistent tap from arriving sooner than expected. Still, I'm swaddled in the glory of the moment, thankful to have held him, to listen to his mother hum in the dark, to hear the creak of the rocker on the hardwood floor. That's it. Thank you all. Thank you all. Ethan, if you're there and you can unmute everybody, I would be thrilled, to get any reactions or to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. It
Oh, here.
looks like Cosmo has a reaction.
Hey, Cosmo. Hi. Hi, Cosmo.
Would you like
Hi.
to
What?
You're gonna say
Hey.
Poppy?
Night.
Love you.
Thank you, Dad.
Thank you so much. That was so beautiful.
Thank you. I really enjoyed the wide variety of topics and
Good. Thank
all sort of different things. That was really neat.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Very kind of you to say.
I checked our records and your father was president from 65 to 67 and
Okay.
treasurer the year before that.
There we go. Thank you, Ethan. Thank you for fact checking.
And I am a regular curler, so I really appreciate your poem on curling. You'll be disappointed to learn, if you didn't already know from watching the Olympics, that those brooms that made that loud slapping sound are no longer in use. It's just quiet brushes. It's a lot more boring than it was.
I guess if you're playing the game, it's a lot more exciting.
Yes.
I was going to say that I have a pretty long history with the club. You might know, I think maybe I mentioned it in my notes, I forgot, but I went to preschool down in the basement of the club when my mom, Doris Harkness, the one that painted the cover of my book, when she joined together with some other parents to form what was really a pioneering parent-toddler co-op, one of the first around, and it was absolutely pioneering, and I was part of that. I think that was actually before kindergarten. Yeah, that was preschool. So yeah, I was me and the club, we go way back. Way back. Hi, Mom.
Hi. I love the one about curling because I knew that Ethan would get a kick out of that.
Yeah.
Eddie, I think you should join.
The curling club, right?
No.
You think I should?
Oh, the community club. Yeah, that too.
Community club. I thought you meant the Granite Curling Club.
No, community club.
No, yeah, you're right. I really should join the club. Ethan, put me down. How do you join? What are the, Aaron, how do you?
You go to go to hallerlakecommunityclub.org
Uh-huh.
and click on join the club at the top.
Okay, sounds pretty straightforward. I think I can do that.
Thank you.
All
To join the
right.
curling club too. We have an open house next weekend.
Oh, cool. Great.
It didn't sound like you had a lot of fun when you last were there a couple of decades ago.
Yeah, yeah.
More fun when you understand the game, as you probably figured out. More fun when you understand the game, what's happening in the game. Right?
Yeah. Any questions anybody wants to ask? Fire at will. Any reactions? Oh,
I'm going to ask probably a dumb question from
no such thing as-
especially your one about the fellow in the truck. Sounds like a short story. What's the difference between a free form poem and a short story?
It's a very tough distinction to make. There are things called, there's a kind of a hybrid form called a prose poem, which is written, in a block, like a paragraph. Oftentimes it's not much longer than a paragraph, but it's not broken into lines. It's written as a block of prose. But I guess the promoters of prose poems would argue that a prose poem is prose on the one hand, but it has elements of poetry in the other. It might rely on certain poetic devices, maybe the use of certain kinds of figurative language, or the use of repetition, or some kind of sound effect that might be more associated with poetry. So it's kind of a hybrid form. But my particular poem is, I tend to be narrative. My poems are stories oftentimes,
Right.
and that's an example of one. But it's those distinctions are kind of fine. All I can say is that, when you're writing poetry in organic form, you're kind of making up the rules as you go, and that's why it's called open or organic form. The more common term is free verse, although that's kind of misleading and a little deceptive, because there's nothing exactly free about writing a poem. I mean, it's whether it rhymes, whether it's in a strict form, a traditional or received form, or whether it's an open form, not without end rhymes and that kind of thing. It's all poetry. I mean, it's really tricky to try to pin down, to try to put poetry in a box and to find it, and because it's bigger than that. It's bigger than any definition. If that makes any sense. One of my favorite definitions of poetry is Robert Frost's comment that a poem begins in delight and ends in wisdom. That's always been a favorite of mine. And the reason I like it a lot is because it applies both to poet, the creator, the poet, and the listener or the reader. A poem begins in delight and ends in wisdom. For the poet, you just write because you love words, you love the sounds of words, and you take delight in them. But if you're lucky and the poem works out the way you hope it will work, and you make certain kinds of discoveries about yourself, then you've gained kind of an incremental bit of self-awareness or self-knowledge, self-understanding. So a poem begins in delight and ends in wisdom. Always love that. Any other questions about poetry?
Well, Ed, this is Patricia. I would just like to say thank you. I received your book as a gift after I admired the poem,
Oh,
The Spoon, which as you were saying, it is a whole story. There's so many stories there.
Yeah.
But of course it evokes so much in the reader. All those implements, all those sacred kitchens of your life,
Yeah.
you know, all those implements, your grandmother's knife that was worn into a curve from
Oh,
all the paring of all the fruit, all the years,
yeah.
or your grandmother's rolling pin that
Uh-huh.
rolled out all those jelly rolls in Ohio,
Oh, yeah.
or your father's bread bowl, all those sacred objects. So I did love it, and I do appreciate the law of the unforeseen. I have to look for the others. Thank you so much for coming this evening.
Oh,
It's been wonderful to hear your voice.
thank you. Thank you so much.
Yay. Okay, Eddie, I'm gonna put mom to bed.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, bye, Doris.
Bye.
Thanks for coming. See you
Bye.
soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank
Thank
you,
you
Ed.
very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Appreciate it.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you, Karen. Thank you, Ethan, for putting this together. I really appreciate it. Okay. Bye-bye. I guess. Are we all done here? Ethan?
Okay, bye-bye. Thank you again.
Yeah, I was accidentally muted there when I'm saying something. Thank you again very, very much. We can. close.
Thank you all.
All right.
Thank you. Bye.
Take
Bye.
care. See you all.